We have brand new June ADP, so it's time for another version of my Dynasty spin on Guy Fieri's diners, drive-ins, and dives to scour through the ugly parts of Dynasty ADP and find those hidden gems among the muck. So welcome in to another episode of Dynasty Fallers, Fill-ins, and Flyers. First up, we have our faller who just 18 months ago was being valued as a back-end Dynasty RB1, but now is barely even an RB3 at RB36 overall in June ADP, and that's Antonio Gibson. And I'm sure that if you've been plugged into Dynasty content recently, that you've heard the hype on Gibson recently as a buy. Even on this channel, Justin did a bit on him just a month ago, highlighting him as a buy, and you know what? Everybody's right. Remember, this was a running back who finished as the RB8 in fantasy in 2021 with 1,300 yards and 10 touchdowns. And then last season was the RB16 up until week 11, which was right when he fractured his foot that he somehow still played through, but his usage declined heavily in favor of a healthy Brian Robinson. And since that's the last thing that we remember about Antonio Gibson and about Brian Robinson's usage last year, I think that's the driving factor for Gibson falling hard in ADP. But 2023 is a new season with a new offense, new offensive coordinator, and Gibson is still the most dynamic and explosive back in the Commanders' backfield. Brian Robinson is an average two-down back with mediocre receiving skills. New rookie Chris Rodriguez is the same as Brian Robinson, but with even fewer receiving abilities. J.D. McKissic is no longer on the team, so the only back with legitimate receiving capabilities is Antonio Gibson. Plus, he also has the ability to be a three-down workhorse like we saw back in 2021. RB36 is an insane value for a player that can give you weekly flex appeal just on his own with everybody healthy, with the upside of workhorse weeks if Brian Robinson were to get hurt and Gibson takes all of his work during those specific weeks. Or honestly, maybe Bieniemy just prefers Gibson because of his skill set more than Brian Robinson, and Gibson is the 1A in this offense. That could really happen. We don't really know. There is no reason for Antonio Gibson to be going behind guys like James Cook, David Montgomery, and Isaiah Pacheco. I think you can argue he's a better asset to have now in Dynasty than guys like Alvin Kamara or Dalvin Cook too. And I would prefer Gibson over rookies like Devon Achane, Kendre Miller, Roschon Johnson, basically any rookie running back not named Bijan, Gibbs, or Zach Charbonnet. I'm taking Gibson over all of them. A perfect example of how to acquire him in a trade. In one of my leagues, actually, I traded away Devonta Smith for DK Metcalf and Antonio Gibson, a trade that I view as a lateral move at receiver, going from Devonta Smith down to DK Metcalf in the same exact tier for me. So then I basically got a free Antonio Gibson who could finish as an RB2 this year with Brian Robinson healthy, let alone, like I said, the upside for spike weeks if Robinson were to miss any time at all. Gibson is just such an easy buy for me right now at these prices, and y'all should be actively trying to go out and get him. Next up, we have our fill-in, and I needed to scroll all the way down to tight end 31 in June ADP because that is where Tyler Higbee is, who, fun fact for you, finished as the tight end 6 last year, averaging more fantasy points per game than Kyle Pitts, Greg Dulcich, and Gerald Everett, and only 0.3 points per game less than Pat Freiermuth. And he's not a one-year wonder either because in 2021, he finished as the tight end 14 overall, tight end 13 in points per game, again, averaging more fantasy points than Pat Freiermuth, Gerald Everett, Cole Kmet, Evan Ingram. Yeah, that guy right now is currently tight end 31 in ADP. And honestly, I think you can argue that Tyler Higbee is in for a career year in 2023 because the depth chart for the Rams receiving room right now is just, it's not great. Remember in 2021, the Rams receiving room was Cooper Kupp, Robert Woods, Van Jefferson, Odell Beckham Jr. for the second half, and Higbee still finished as the tight end 14 that year. And then last year, it was Cooper Kupp, Allen Robinson, Van Jefferson, and Higbee finished as a tight end 12 in points per game and tight end 6 overall. Now, in 2023, Cooper Kupp still there, obviously, but after him is Van Jefferson still, Ben Skoranek, Tutu Atwell, and fifth-round rookie Puka Nacua. That's it. Plus, we get a healthy Matthew Stafford back, and all of this is adding up to Tyler Higbee probably seeing 100-plus targets for the second year in a row. And if you see 100-plus targets as a tight end in fantasy these days, it's almost impossible not to finish inside the top 10, if not higher, with a high catch percentage or a decent number of touchdowns scored, both of which he could do in this Rams offense with a healthy Matthew Stafford. So if you're looking for a quality backup tight end or even another guy to add to the rotation every single week as a streaming candidate, I think Tyler Higbee is your guy, and he can be had at a fraction of the cost of all the other popular guys like Chico Okonkwo, Greg Dulcich, Juwan Johnson, all the rookies this year, he is cheaper than all of them. And I'm not saying that he's a better asset than all of those guys long term, but if you just need someone who can be productive for 2023 alone, take a look at Tyler Higbee. And lastly, we have our flyer. And I'm going to give you guys a warning here. This is a very, very gross name. So if you need to stop eating or sit down or whatever you need to do it right now. You ready? It's Carson Wentz. And I know, but I did give you a warning. I did say it was going to be a gross name. Don't say that I didn't, but just hear me out for a second. Carson Wentz is basically free right now. Honestly, he might even be free. Go out and check your waiver wires just in case he's there. But that price tag of free or basically free is really the only reason why I'm even highlighting him here as a flyer on your roster in the first place. He may never be a true starting quarterback in the NFL again, or if he is, it's only going to be some like half-year bridge quarterback thing like what we've seen with Mitch Trubisky, Andy Dalton, Teddy Bridgewater, all these perennial backups who bounce around the league just because they're good enough to stay in the NFL. That's where Carson Wentz is right now. In fact, he's not even on a team right now. He's just waiting on the couch for someone to call him and offer him a job. So that's probably the reason why he's so free and so cheap in leagues right now. But just look at what Carson Wentz has done from a fantasy perspective since 2020. QB 19 in points per game with the Philadelphia Eagles, throwing to Travis Fulgham, Greg Ward, and Jalen Reagor. QB 18 in points per game with the Indianapolis Colts, throwing to Michael Pittman and then Zach Pascal. And then QB 19 in points per game last year with Washington, throwing to Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson, including 3 of his 7 games over 20 fantasy points, 2 of which were actually over 25. So 3 seasons in a row of top 20 fantasy production on a per game basis. That's good enough for me to take the shot on him with like my last bench spot in Superflex leagues, just to see where he signs and if he gets an opportunity to start at all this year for any team. Maybe a major injury happens to a quarterback and Wentz signs to fill in for a part of, or maybe even all of the season, and Arizona is a really good example of that already as the bridge quarterback until Kyler Murray returns. Or maybe the Jimmy Garoppolo situation in Vegas really goes south and they need a healthy guy for just 2023 before making a more long-term investment in 2024, and Wentz gets to throw to Devontae Adams and Jacoby Myers for a year. Or maybe he just signs outright with Tampa Bay, who is probably the worst quarterback room in the league right now with Baker Mayfield and Kyle Trask. And Wentz could surely come in, win that job, and then he'd be thrown to Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. There are things that could happen that could lead to Wentz starting games for a team in 2023. And for basically the cost of a bench spot on your roster, it's worth it for me just to see what happens. But if you want to know about 5 other players that Justin and I think that you should be acquiring right now in Dynasty if you are a contender, then you should check out this video right up here.